And I looked, and behold, the heavens were opened. A ninth season.
We believe in the Trinity. We believe in the five solas. We believe in the doctrines of grace.
Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Matthew 4:4.
A lot of the time, people are asking the wrong questions. They're not asking the questions like, do I understand God's grace? Do I understand the cross?
Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. Colossians 3:16.
Every single one of us has our own ministry. Doesn't matter if you work as a CEO or you work at McDonald's or whatever you do, or whether you're quote unquote in ministry, you have a ministry.
As we mature, we walk, we enjoy our relationship with God in as much as we see his majesty in the blessings that we have just by what Yeshua has done for us, not by what we have done to impress God and then get something from him.
So faith, so salvation by faith.
Absolutely. Salvation by faith. I keep zeroing in on these, the big ideas, like what is biblical love? What is grace? Do I have an accurate understanding of God's grace? Our love for Yeshua, but his love, like through us, is why we're doing what we're doing. And that's why it's called Messiah Matters.
It is Wednesday, December 7th, 2022. This is Messiah Matters number 411, still in season 9, but my mind is already in season 10. My name is Caleb Haig.
It's an inaugurated season 10, almost. I'm Rob Vanhoff. I don't know what to say. So
Yeah, so do not fear, chat room. Do not fear. The theme music is not going anywhere. Our theme music will continue to be our theme music. However, the intro, the countdown, the first, right now it's 2 minutes and 27 seconds, but who knows what it could become. Maybe we need a 5-minute countdown.
28.
It could be 5. You never can tell. And when we found our theme music, when did we do that? Was that coming into Messiah Matters?
You found it.
I found it.
You found it and created it. Well, wait a minute.
I didn't create it. We purchased our theme music.
You layered it. You
the actual theme music with the baritone sax we bought.
Yeah,
we bought that. We licensed that. And
is that a real performance, or is that synth samples?
That's got to be synth samples.
It's the guy, so tight.
The guy, it is tight. The guy who wrote it, he's got like 128 songs on various places.
But it's well done. Tight. It's legit horn section stuff. Like, you know what I mean? It's material that
he's got a Spotify. He's got a spot. Anyway, not the point. He's a legit musician. Let's just put it that way. Obviously, that's not going anywhere. But I gotta say, we're working hard now. Mike is working on getting a new producer credit up, so that's going to be up in the next week. Now we're going to try to launch season 10 next week. Next Wednesday is the goal. However, we might have to push it out depending on whether or not we get all of our stuff done. And Not only that, but we have to have good content. So I want our chat room to really send in the best stuff you got, the best questions, comments, whatever you got. And in fact, let's do this. If you want something to be talked about on our season 10 opener, please give us a shout out, 253-465-3205. It's 253-465-3205. You won't talk to us. You just talk to an answer machine. And you can also shoot us an email,
we have a kind answering machines. Really good listener.
That's right.
Will not interrupt.
Exactly.
Will not escalate.
I'm opening something here. Anyway,
might hang up on you.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so give us a call or chegg@torahresource.com. CHEGG@torahresource.com. That's our email address. Send us emails. Can we have a special season 10 Rob's Gematria? Oh, should we throw back to Rob's Gematria? Maybe it's time. Maybe it is time.
Maybe our producer mug needs to have a big yod on it.
Oh, please. No, let's not. Okay. Anyway. And by the way, for those of you who do celebrate the Hanukkah, Torah Resource has all sorts of free stuff for you. Go check out. There's a booklet you can
the Christmas,
download.
The Easter,
the Christmas, the Hanukkah.
Do you celebrate the Christmas? Do you celebrate the Hanukkah?
But for perhaps most important of all is don't forget to subscribe. It really, really does help us out. Okay, today for some reason it must be Friday giving or something like that because we've already gotten 2 super chats, and I have now opened up my my soundboard.
Oh yeah, they get a chosen sample bite.
So Love is Bigger always she always requests the weights and measures. I will add something to her weights and measures here. And Bobby, go ahead and let me know what you want to hear if you have anything. Here we go. This is for Love is Bigger. Hang on, sorry. Why am I not hearing this? Okay. Well, never mind. I guess I don't have it. Why is that not working?
I can do it live. Weights and
measures.
I know you have other.
I don't know why my soundboard's not working.
Little special frills added to that clip.
That's so unfortunate. That's so unfortunate. I had them all already. Wow, look at this. Everybody, we love you so much. Okay, if I had a soundboard, I'd play sounds for you, but apparently I don't. And I don't know why. Let me try reopening it. We'll reopen it and we'll try again in a few seconds. All right. While I try to get our soundboard going so that we can say thank you to all of our people who have super chatted us in the past few seconds. And we are very grateful for that. Actually, there's a lot of things that we are paying for right now, including, and maybe I'll just drop a little hint. I might be spending a little bit of money to get a new intro for season 10. Might be spending, and I'm not sure it might come out of my own pocket here because I got an idea. I got an idea.
Yeah, and Caleb hasn't told me anything about it, so
I have not said anything to Rob. So here's the question. Here's the other question. I know that we need to be talking about biblical stuff here, but let's ask the chat room, since we've just had so many super chats. Let's ask the chat room: should Rob go into the new music and the new countdown into season 10 fresh, or should we let him hear it so that he can approve it first? Let us know your ideas.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, cool.
Yeah. I wonder. I wonder if I know why my thing's not working. I think I do, but I would have to go upstairs to get my additional. I know what's going on.
See, what we're seeing right now is Caleb has 2 apps running in his brain. One is Caleb for the Messiah Matters, and the other is producer, thinking about.
I'm doing it all, man.
All the technology that's happening or not happening. For me, right. I just sit and sip water and talk.
Yeah, that's right.
I have the easy job here.
That's okay. We'll try one more time. Nope, we don't have it. It's because my external hard drive is sitting on my desk upstairs. Okay, we're just going to quit that, and we're going to go ahead and just. I'm sorry, Rob always already recreated one. You can Google it. See, there we go. We got the soundboard right here. Anyway, okay, so let's get into some biblical matters. Now, I am going to come up here. So last week we talked about Timothy's comment, and so he's asking questions about tradition. We'll read his comment that we read last week, and then he made an additional comment and just a little clarification. Now he's talking about something specific, okay, and that thing that he's talking about that is specific is Jewish tradition. Whether or not Christians should keep Jewish tradition.
I'm going to need.
I'll reread it.
Okay.
I clipped this, and so if you go to the Messiah Matters short videos, you can see the short clip, like 5 minutes long, 5 or 6 minutes long, something like that. But this was his original question. He said, "My question to you is in 1 Corinthians 11:2 and 2 Thessalonians 2:15." Now, this brought up a whole nother sub conversation about whether or not women should have their heads covered or we're allowed to speak in church. There was a whole thing. Anyway, go back and watch 410. 410 is what you want to watch if you want to see the whole conversation. Anyway, so back to Timothy's question. He says, is Paul teaching that we should be observing Jewish tradition? If Paul is saying that his Gentile churches are supposed to follow Jewish tradition, are we as well? Now, we talked about, why would this be Jewish tradition? No, it's probably the tradition of the manuscripts or the tradition of the scriptures that we have passed down. In other words, tradition can just simply mean, the teaching of Christ passed down, right? So the way that we do stuff and the way that, the halakha, essentially, that comes from Christ, and we have passed it down. And so this is what we talked about. And Timothy writes in again, and he clarifies for us a little bit. He says, "Hello, Caleb and Rob. Thank you for addressing my question. The reason I said Jewish tradition was because the Greek word paradosis in the Thayer's Greek lexicon definition of it describes it as the Jewish oral traditions." Now, we're going to talk about this for just a second, but I'm going to take this I think I'm going to take this conversation in a totally different place that Timothy does not mean to take it, and that's totally fine. Basically, I'm going to use Timothy's comment to go into a different realm here. But first, let's talk about Thayer's his lexicon and the fact that he uses Jewish tradition. I'm going to let Rob go ahead and take this one. Go for it, Rob.
Oh yeah, well, Caleb and I were chatting about this the other day when Caleb shared with me that Timothy's refined question, and yeah, so Thayer is not. There are no serious Greek scholars today who go to Thayer's. I mean, that's the first thing. I think it's over 100 years old, isn't it? Correct me if I'm wrong. I would guess it's over 100 years old. And it written by a person who has kind of a strange, Thayer had a strange theological orientation. I think he was Unitarian.
So this brings up, wait, hang on, just stop right there.
Which doesn't affect his scholarship. But the point is there's no, the idea that this is Jewish tradition was his opinion, and it's
okay, hang on. As my 3-year-old would say, T. Let's talk about that for just a second. So here's a question that a realm that we could go in. Here's something that we could walk down a little bit. I mean, does it matter what the person's theological position is when they're writing something like a lexicon? And the reason I would say that is, I mean, you might have people like, Bart Ehrman, for instance. Dr. Ehrman is a renowned Greek scholar, even though he's not a believer, and he has fought viciously against Christianity and manuscript tradition and so on and so forth. But that might not mean that his lexicon would be off, right?
Well, that's true. That's true. That was a side note,
sure,
just to say that. But I don't know the whole story about Joseph Thayer. So we're talking, 100 plus years ago. Pretty sure it's in the 19th century. So probably over 125 years ago. No Greek scholar takes it seriously today. I believe it's linked to BDB or not. What do they call it? Blue Letter Bible. BLB, Blue Letter Bible, because it's public domain.
Yeah, it's open source.
Right? Because it's like old scans, and so BLB or Blue Letter Bible is taking pains to excerpt all the entries and make them quick access to, hyperlinked to various Greek words and index, Strong's Concordance and stuff like that. And again, that reflects I don't know if it's not naivete on the part of the BLB producers, because I'm not, but it's just a little uninformed. It's like it's not refreshed with the times. But yeah, so to look to Thayer, regardless of whether he was, regardless of his faith commitment, to read Paradosis as Jewish tradition is clearly wrong.
This brings up a really
because we have.
Well, I was just going to say this brings up a really good point, because we've actually had a significant amount of expansion and good scholarship done on rabbinical and thought process on rabbinical sources within the scholarly community, even within the past 20 to 30 years, right? So, I mean, if you look back in the 70s and 80s, the use of rabbinical sources is drastically different within scholarly works, is drastically different than it is today. And the older you get, the more you see such reliance on rabbinical tradition. In fact, you start to see this shift a bit right when we come into the 90s and the 2000s. People start to realize, hey, the rabbinical tradition or the rabbinical literature doesn't actually go back to the first century. So we can't read something that was written 400 or 500 years later back into the first century. Now, of course, you can have people within the Jewish understanding, traditional Jewish understanding that's going to say, no, the oral tradition the Mishnah was extant in the first century. It just wasn't written down. And we, of course, push against this. But I think that as a whole, and I'm not trying to steal your thunder here, Rob, I'm just saying that as a whole, scholarship in general has shifted. You see like and there are good works that still rely heavily on Jewish literature. For instance, and I'll give you for instance, then I'll kick it back to you. But for instance, E.P. Sanders' Judaisms from 65 B. I'm going to get the dates wrong. It's like the work is referenced as Judaisms. The subtitle is like 65 BC to 70 AD or something like that. Anyway,
is that like Jewish law or something like that? Yeah.
So what he does is he just gives a history of what kind of, he tries to paint a very specific picture of what was going on in the first century around the Judaisms, and he does paint a picture of multiple Judaisms, how the temple service was being run, all these kind of things, and he uses multiple sources. This is done by E.P. Sanders, of course. So super juggernaut scholar, but what Sanders does in that work, and I use Judaisms quite a bit, to be completely honest. I use that work a lot because I think that he does a really good job of bringing together sources. But what he uses is things like Philo. He uses Josephus. He uses other first century literature or around the first century, and then he relies heavily on rabbinical texts. And so what I use this for is to see oftentimes how the Mishnah and the Talmud paint the picture of the first century, and then does it line up with other first century works. Anyway, all of this to say, when we look at something like E.P. Sanders' works, specifically Judaisms, he's going to rest heavily on the rabbinical literature. Once we get into the 2000s and later, and now into our specific year, scholarship is much more hesitant to reference the rabbinical literature unless they're saying the rabbinical literature here lines up with what we see in Josephus and Philo, and therefore there might be some validity to it. That's my point. Okay, back to you.
And I'm glad like we're looking at this in terms of chronology of scholarship, because basically what we have is an acceleration of learning, because we have more scholars now with the amazing tools that even right. E.P. Sanders didn't consider, right? He was dealing with a typewriter in the 70s, pretty much. Yeah. And the Dead Sea Scrolls had not, there was some enthusiasm in the news, but they hadn't really been thoroughly by multiple experts published and scrutinized and et cetera, until into the 90s did that really happen. And then also so this is still 100 years after Thayer, when Thayer says, "Oh, paradosis is Jewish tradition," that's the best his knowledge at the time. But he had no clue of right. The Dead Sea Scrolls wouldn't be discovered for another 50, 60 years, and so there's just such an increase in learning and attention.
Right.
To I did a quick search. Thayer actually was president of SBL for 1 year, like 1885 or 1894 to 1895 or something like that. In the late 1800s, he was for 1 year he was president of SBL. But SBL then was nothing like it is now. And so what I liken it to is that we're looking at the same material. Like everything that was available to Thayer is available to us. Everything that was available to E.P. Sanders. By the way, I just learned that he died like 2 weeks ago.
What?
E.P. Sanders died on November 21st.
No way.
Yeah, 85 years old. Yeah.
Wow.
So
well, I'm blessed to have been able to meet him.
I've got somewhere we got a picture of you and him. I think somewhere.
Yeah. That's
that was your
bad.
Little girl moment.
What? Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't as bad as mine, I'll admit. My Steve Vai in the elevator was pretty.
Oh man, should we tell that story now? Have we told that story online before?
Probably. Well, let me finish this first, and then you can feel free. Okay, so what we need to do is realize that what E.P. Sanders had in his day of scholarship, we still have. But what we the scholars have now available to us is like almost unfathomable back to what Thayer had available. And so because we have such greater resolution or finer granularity, of material, sources and understanding of social, how religions work and all these kind of things. And with the Dead Sea Scrolls, we realize that we can't just use what I think of as a Duplo Lego approach anymore. When everybody's building with robotic Legos, we can't use the 2-year-old giant Legos that are just, the kids kind of clank around with and chew on. And so when I see like someone going to a Thayer for a definition, it reminds me of that. It's like trying to use a tool that is really obsolete. It is just a hot wiring solution. Oh, it just means Jewish tradition, which really confuses so many things. So
this is a great segue into what I wanted to talk about, and this is the idea that we push on scholarship. Recently I had I've had several people say to me recently, which is understandable, but we had one person say, well, they asked a definition of a Greek word, and Rob gave it to them, and then the question was, well, do you have any lexicons that support that? And I
said, I am the lexicon. No.
Yeah. And then we had somebody else say, well, this is pure,
why should I believe you if it's not in the lexicon?
Right. And then we also had someone say, well, there's an article that they referenced. Well, this is peer-reviewed article, a peer-reviewed article, and we were pushing against it. And then, I think there's this idea of, well, once again, back to the lexicons, like, oh, well, you're disagreeing with the lexicon here. How do you do that? And really, I think that one of the things that needs to be, I guess, just kind of highlighted I think the role of scholarship and the role of those who dedicate their lives, and this isn't necessarily me, but people like Rob and my father and those who are doing work in manuscripts and working on specific topics and have specialties and things like that. What they're doing is they are it's like Jurassic Park. Oh, here we go. I got an analogy.
Good. I like it. Go for it.
It's like the dinosaurs testing the electrical fences. The guy says, "Oh, the T-Rex, the Velociraptors, they continue to test the electrical fences, and they'll never touch one in the same place twice. But they're looking for weaknesses so that they can break out. And this is essentially the same thing with scholarship. What scholars are doing is they're going and they're pushing on various aspects of scholarship that has come before them to see if there's weakness there and to see if there is something that has been missed. And ultimately, one of my teachers once said that if you are preaching something that no one has ever preached before, you're preaching heresy. And I think that this is somewhat of a truth. In other words, the truth of the Bible has always been there, but how we see certain truths and how those truths are hashed out and how maybe the remnant that is not the majority, but the minority is understanding the Bible. These things need to be worked on more and more. And I'll give you an example. This is something that my buddy Jeff Young said recently. He said that, and I don't necessarily agree with this, but it's something that has made me go, he was talking about a discussion that was happening at SBL, and I don't even know if Jeff actually agrees with this or not, but he was talking about a discussion that was going on at SBL, and I'm probably get this wrong, but this is how I heard it, on whether or not the idea of man being created in God's image means that only the people who have a relationship with God are created in his image because they have a relationship with him and therefore they bear the image of God, or whether or not all humans are created in the image of God. And this is kind of the discussion that was going on at ETS. And I think that that is a so that's something I've never thought of before, and it's not a mainstream belief. But we might press on that. We might hash that out and go in and look throughout the scriptures how something like image of God is used and how being created in the image of God is being used within text, and stress those points to see whether or not the traditional view breaks or not. So this is, I think, ultimately, when we look at something like Thayer's lexicon, we can say, well, this is outdated because good scholarship has come and has has hashed this out and realized that Thayer was wrong on this understanding. Bobby,
yeah, the reason the lex, if you go to BDB now, let's say it's a Hebrew one that's 100 years old versus Halot, which is more new, or you look at the BDAG, which is the newest Greek lexicon, which is being updated. The difference between lexicons 100 years ago and lexicons today is the quality of questions and the quality of attention given to research those questions along the line similar to the methodology you were just describing. In other words, why does BDAG, have way more detailed entries than Thayer? And that's because there is 100 years plus of scholarship refining testing and refining according to the questions that the lexicographers, those are the scholars, lexicographers, to the questions they're asking and the research they're doing to get answers. But as new lexicographers come and are trained in history and language, and maybe new archaeological discoveries or new texts are found, even that might not be biblical text, but it might be a Greek text from the first century somewhere that has some use of the word paradosis, for example, in a new context. That new material gets integrated. It sharpens the questions that the scholars are asking. And then so in the new version of the lexicon, all that new data is now come to bear. And so the lexicons are a tool that are serving, they're not like in the place of a leader, right? They are tools for the heavy thinkers. And the heavy thinkers are the ones that are giving the presentations at SBL or ETS, and they're pushing the boundaries of knowledge in a intense peer-reviewed environment, and that dialogue, that back and forth, sharpens up, and that then is going to get encoded in a newer version of BDAG, right? That will come to bear. And then that will reflect that new knowledge. And then again, that cycle is going to happen again and again. So even the Halot we have now, or the BDAG we have now, Halot is Hebrew Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament. The BDAG is the Greek, standard Greek lexicon for early Christian texts. And it does have a little bit of Septuagint in it also. But those are not the be all end all either, even though they're pretty up to date. In 20 years, there's going to be a new, either revised version of each of those, or if some new institution comes along with a bunch of scholars and says, we are going to create a brand new ancient Hebrew lexicon, that could happen. And it could integrate all what's done before with newer stuff. And again, that then will serve as a tool for a new generation of scholars, et cetera. Anyway, I probably beat that horse up pretty bad.
No, it's okay. Bobby K in the he brings up a name that instantaneously catches my eye. He says, Bobby K says, Benjamin Noonan says, it advances in the study of biblical Hebrew and Aramaic that lots of lexicons provide glosses of a word and not encyclopedic definitions anyways, syntax, etc. So
anybody who cites Ben Noonan is okay by me.
Yeah, exactly. So Dr. Noonan is a good friend of ours. We just saw him at ETS and SBL. Him and his wife, Dr. Noonan, and Dr. Noonan were both there. They are, I would say, leading scholars in biblical. Well, Dr. Noonan, that is Dr. Benjamin Noonan, is a Old Testament scholar and a Hebrew teacher. His wife, Dr. Jennifer Noonan, is a scholar who is trying to advance the way that people teach Hebrew, to biblical Hebrew, to others. And we just love the Noonans, and I'm just going to plug her book because it just came out, and I've only perused it. I haven't read it yet, but it just came out while we were at ETS. It's called A Handbook of SLA for Biblical Studies. And it's $26.99. You can find it on Glossa House. That's GLOSSA house.com. I'll read you the description and you can go buy it yourself. The subtitle is Insights of Modern Language Instruction for Teaching Biblical Languages. Jennifer E. Noonan received her PhD from Hebrew Union College. This is just her bio, but ultimately the book itself we would recommend, and anything by the Noonans, both Dr. and Dr. Noonan. So yes, I would agree wholeheartedly with Dr. Noonan. By the way, his PhD dissertation was way over my head, but the more Hebrew I know and learn, the more I'm impressed by his dissertation.
Yeah, his dissertation is non-Semitic loanwords.
And I think he specifically looks in Daniel, but then he expanded it, right?
Well, it's the whole. He does have an article on Daniel, but it's mostly anywhere like some Egyptian term, let's say.
Right.
So it's basically a lexicon. I mean, it is a. Maybe I shouldn't say lexicon because that's not really fair. Because it's an index and kind of an encyclopedia of non-Semitic loanwords in the Tanakh. So that means because there's Persian words, there's Egyptian, there's Hittite, there's words that are non-Semitic, there's Sumerian, that then he brings them in. Now they're spelled in Hebrew letters, of course, but then he'll talk about the original language that it came from. This is from the Egyptian word this, and then he gives a brief history of scholars used to think that it was this word, but evidence now shows it's really this word. And he does that by, I don't know, there might be 200 entries.
Well, he wrote a book about it. His dissertation became a book, which I, by the way, don't have, unfortunately. I'm sure my father has it. I'm positive my father has it. I do not have it, but we're kind of
it is in the weeds. In the weeds.
We're in nerd mode right now. This show is super nerd mode.
Good nerd.
But for those of you who don't know what in the world we're talking about, a loanword is a word that a language such as Hebrew has borrowed from another language. So throughout the Bible, you have these words.
Like the word Pharaoh. Like the word paro. It's not a Hebrew word.
Right.
It's an Egyptian word that is transliterated into Greek, or not Greek, well, later in Greek, but in Hebrew letters. And it becomes a Hebrew word, Pharaoh.
Yeah, they transliterate it, right?
It's a Egyptian word, right? So there's tons of these that he then goes and looks at because he's a specialist in ancient Near Eastern languages. So Egyptian, Hittite, and all these cool ancient obscure languages. He digs out and chases down he gets the receipts basically
Right.
for the common claims, and then he'll be critical of. In many cases, it's like, for years people thought it was this, but this is what it really is, and then he'll show why. So
I first met.
tense.
So this is why this will show you the history. Dr. Benjamin Noonan's mother is a customer of TorahResource.com, and so we found out that Ben was giving a paper at the Evangelical Theological Society in San Diego in 2007. This is when I think he was in undergrad, so he was actually studying for his MDiv, and he and my father and I went to go see him. Anyway, we went to go see him. I had no clue what he was talking about. I mean, he could have been talking about, migration patterns of geese in Southern Africa. I would have had no clue, right? But that was when I first met Dr. Noonan, and throughout the years, every year at ETS, we've seen the progression of him go from that paper into, getting his PhD, writing his dissertation, writing book, meeting his wife, having a child, them bringing their child to ETS and SBL with them, and now they leave her behind with grandparents so that they can come and they can give lectures and don't have to carry. It's been wonderful to think that I'm 41 years old and I've seen different people kind of that are around my age grow up into much better citizens than me. To see the people who have done stuff with their life, it's great to see. Anyway, we greatly respect Dr. Noonan and the work that he's doing. Okay, let's move on. I think that we've talked enough about this. Let's move on. We will now move to Stephen's comments. Stephen writes in often, and all of his comments are always good. This is what he says. He says, could you or Rob please be a little more specific for me on the differences between the Mishnah, the midrash, and a standard biblical commentary like the Matthew Henry, which is used in a lot of Reform circles? As I struggle to learn and grow in the Torah movement, I have heard it said that the midrash and the Mishnah are simply Jewish or rabbinic versions of a Christian Bible commentary. Okay, let's stop right there for a few seconds.
Didn't we do this?
We talked about this, but he wants us to expand it.
Oh, expand. Okay.
So let's stop right there because I think this is a good place that we could actually talk about some of the differences. So he says, I struggle to learn and grow in the Torah movement. I've read that the midrash and the Mishnah are simply Jewish or rabbinic versions of a Christian Bible commentary. So the Mishnah
read that?
He's heard that. So I
heard it or read it. Okay.
Yeah, I heard it or read it. So the Mishnah is certainly not a commentary on the Bible. What the Mishnah is doing is like the work that you might see a pastor attempt to do from the pulpit. In other words, this is how we keep the commandments. So here's the commandment. This is how we keep it. Here's a commandment. This is how we keep it. So it's not taking, and oftentimes the Mishnah is not concerned necessarily with a biblical passage. More, it's concerned with the tradition that we have. So for instance, this is how we wash our hands. First you grab the cup like this and you wash like this, or, on Passover, you have these elements on the plate. Okay, so and this is how you do this. So the Mishnah is much more concerned with a tradition and how we are to keep said tradition. It is not oftentimes it's not linked specifically to passages on why or how we would do something. Now, the Talmud comes along later and says, let's connect these two biblical passages. And so that's kind of the work that the Talmud does. But the Mishnah itself is just kind of a step-by-step guide to keeping the Jewish traditions in the 4th, 5th century. Am I right so far, Rob? You want to jump in here?
The Mishnah is earlier than that, probably. Well, our earliest texts of the Mishnah are later than that, but generally they accept that the Mishnah was codified by Judah the Prince, early 3rd century. But it is a way of thinking of Jewish tradition. However, it is a sectarian, in a way, it's a sectarian presentation of Jewish tradition, right? There were other like we know, very clearly from the first century now, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we know it from the Gospels. We didn't need the Dead Sea Scrolls to know that there were different sects of Judaism, right?
Right.
We got that from the Gospels. We knew there's Pharisees, we knew there's Sadducees. We know there's people who are Herodians, who whatever that was.
I got every time I hear the word Sadducee, I think of my friend Ben, who listens to this podcast, by the way, because he always used to say, yeah, they didn't believe in the resurrection. That's why they're sad, you see. But come on, man. You're the dad joke king. You should really like that one.
I'm like, wow.
All right, fine. Never mind. Keep going.
Dad joke coming out of Caleb's mouth.
I know. Well, I'm a dad now, so okay, keep going.
Yeah, that's good. So the Mishnah it does have places where there is disputes even preserved in the Mishnah. One Beit Hillel says this, but Beit Shammai says something different.
Sure.
And so it does preserve a few different opinions when there's disputes. And sometimes it gives it a final decision, though, and this is the way to do it. And sometimes maybe not so clearly. But whatever it is, there's tons of stuff that was trimmed out in terms of Jewish tradition. So it's a new brand. So the Mishnah represents the rabbinic brand of Judaism. And they don't call it Judaism either. So it's the rabbinic brand of Israel, of what Israel looks like. And
you're right. It's like
it does not try to justify all its rules by attaching everything to Scripture, because the ideology of the Mishnah is that it's an independent revelation from the written Torah, right? So for the Mishnah to try to tie down all of its traditions to Scripture would make it seem like it was derived from the Torah.
Right.
But the rabbinic ideology is that Moses received two discrete revelations at Mount Sinai. One's the written Torah. The other is called, quote, the oral Torah, and that they are two distinct revelations. And only because of social circumstance in the rabbinic telling of the story and social pressures and fear of loss was this, quote, oral Torah that goes in an unbroken chain all the way back to Moses, only oral, put into writing finally. And because of crisis, because of social crisis, it had to be written. Otherwise it would have been lost. But it being written was not the ideal.
Hang on, just real quick. The John 17 Project says, would it be more like the Didache than a commentary? Is that a better approximation? Yeah, the Didache is an interesting work in and of itself, because I think it shows an interim place where Christianity and Judaism is still linked, but Christianity is attempting to find its own legs. So I see Didache as a strange early sect. Like it didn't take, like the FFOZ and who's the he did his PhD on it. Nassim, I think is his name. They try to put the Didache as back in the first century, and actually present it as if it has valid instruction for the church. Or for Messianic Jews, and that's such I tried dipping my feet into the Didache studies, and I'll tell you what, I disagree with most scholars because I think it's late. I think it's
late. Yeah, we know. And here's things that I remember asking. I think it's Daniel Nassim. I asked him about it because he had just finished his dissertation on the Didache, and I said, "Hey, well, what do you think about where it talks about the gospel as a written text?"
Right.
And it's like, I think I kind of caught him off guard. I'm like, yeah, we know that it's only in the second century when the word gospel in Greek is used as it's an object of written text that's being cited, the gospel. That's way late. So and there's other reasons.
Yeah. I think end of the second century. And I know a lot of scholars are saying, no, it can't be that late. I think it's end of the second century. Anyway, not the point.
The point is the reason in the Messianic Jewish world, and when I say Messianic Jewish, I mean Jews that are you probably have a bilateral ecclesiology,
Right.
And they believe in the Bible, like they believe in the 66 books. But when it comes to exegesis of that position, that there is that because they arrive at that view of the world because they've walked through the rabbinic Candyland, right? And they come out, they've got like, little candy stuck to them, and they've been drinking the chocolate river and all this kind of stuff.
Willy Wonka,
yeah. They come out, they've got little,
and the Talmud factory.
They got candy canes, wet licked candy canes stuck to their clothes, and then
Right.
they go and they read the gospel, and then they interpret it through rabbinic
Right.
Candyland or Wonderland.
Right.
But then what happens subsequently they bring this worldview into the gospels. And so that's why they have rabbis. That's why they say there's 613 for Israel, and the Gentiles have a limited portion in the Torah, and that the rabbinic halakha goes back, right? I mean, because they are projecting the rabbinic imagination from the Babylonian Talmud times
And propaganda.
back into the first century. So that's why, but because they don't arrive at it exegetically from the text, they look at they kind of go, oh, well, there's this didache thing, or there's just midrash about, Abraham and destroying the idols, in his father's idol shop. There's different kinds of stories and lore that they draw from later times to try to edify the church.
Okay, hang on just a
And
sec. Let's talk for just a second. So let's answer the second part of Stephen's question. Midrash is taking a well-known story, making a new story on top of that story that is not historically accurate to try to prove a point, to make a application. That's how I see it. That's how I see midrash.
Technically, if you want the technical definition, which I got from my teacher, Marty Jaffe, is this. Mishnah, so you have Mishnah and Midrash. Mishnah is a legal tradition, meaning it has to do with law, how to do something, procedure, kind of like what Caleb was talking
Propaganda.
about. That is procedure of how to wash your hands, or how to do such and such a thing, or what is acceptable, what is not. A tradition codified in like a sentence or two that is transmitted independent of scripture. It's
Right.
not tied to a scripture. It's not trying to explain a scripture. It just is for its own sake. A midrash is a tradition. It can be legal or agadic, which means it could just be for the sake of telling a moral, making a moral story,
Right.
that is transmitted dependent on a scripture text.
Right.
So a midrash will always be linked to a verse of scripture.
Right.
A Mishnah will rarely be linked to scripture. Both of those can have a legal content or agadic, but technically the Mishnah is mostly legal.
But when I think of
there's
Mishnah
Mishnah Avot, or the sayings of the fathers, which is really the only place in the Mishnah, a few sprinkles here and there, but of the bulk of the Mishnah Avot is the only purely agadic. It's just sayings with little moral, just keep kind of like James, like be quick to hear and slow to speak, like little one-liners like that.
Right. Okay. I think we have time for one more. I hope that answered your question, Stephen. Write in again if it didn't. So we got time for one more. And then after this, oh, actually, hang on. I missed an entire section of Stephen's. Should we read the rest of it? Or are we done with it?
Let's do it. I don't want to.
Stephen says, for an example, here we go. So for an example, how would each of these commentaries deal with a passage of scripture like Genesis 14 and Abraham's encounter with Melchizedek, or any other passage that you think would be better for an illustration? I remember a great conversation with your father on the subject a long time ago, and the conclusion of that conversation was that there's no reason to ignore these works, and they are good to study for historical information, true, but they shouldn't be seen as our main source of biblical food. They are not inspired, which I believe tends to be more a problem in some sections within the Messianic community, and of course branches of the many Judaisms. Yeah, I think that they are. So here's the biggest problem that I have. So I'll say this. When we think of rabbinic literature, one of the problems that I see within the Torah movement, specifically the Messianic movement, is the notion that we should be taking the commentary of the Jews as a source of commentary. Now, I think that there are certainly things, anybody can have good insights, right? So I think that there are times that Mark Nanos, who is not a believer, has had some great insights on the book of Romans. I think that it's been interesting for me. I don't think that they're right, but there has been insights that I've used from Bart Ehrman, who is an atheist, on, say, the book of Luke. And I have pushed against those insights. So we can take insights from just about anyone and say, that's interesting, maybe I'll build on that. So that can happen even within the non-believing Jews. However, the work of the rabbis, in my opinion, is not something I would use as a commentary. I might go check to see what they have said on something so that I can better understand a position. I might also go look to see what they have said as a historical understanding of what the Jews believed in a certain time, or maybe how it formed a belief that is in Judaism today, or maybe even a belief that has crossed over into Christianity. So we might be able to see those things within the historical text of Rabbinic Judaism. However, when it comes to Rabbinic Judaism, we have to remember that these people that have written the rabbinical texts have rejected Christ. They don't believe in the true Messiah. And that has painted their belief and how they see the scriptures. Beyond that,
they haven't heard the gospel. Right. We have to say that that's a possibility too.
Finally, beyond that, the other thing that we have to realize is that Jewish mysticism is strong and alive and has been ever since the days of Christ. And we see this even like Simon the Magician. The point here is that the rabbinical texts are oftentimes painted and seen through the lens of Jewish mysticism. And that is something that we should fight against strongly, because I think it moves over into the Baal cults. I don't think that it is of God. And therefore, we have a sprinkling of idolatry within the lens that is interpreting certain things within Judaism. That's not across the board. I don't want people to, I'm not saying that every text that the non-believing Jews have written is, it's not an anti-Semitic thing to say that Israel has followed after the Baals. And I think that we see that within their writings. That's how I see that.
Well, we say, the prophets made that claim. Were they anti-Semitic?
Exactly. Anyway, I hope that helps. I will take let's say one more thing on that. When it comes to choosing a commentary, I think this is one of the reasons that we choose multiple commentaries, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to find historical accuracy, theological maybe divides, so that we can see how different theologies have understood certain passages. And then from that, what we do is we attempt to understand the Bible as interpreting itself as well. And so this is how we come to biblical conclusions. But even within Christian commentaries, we have to be very careful, because people have a specific theology that they're coming from. And we all have biases. There's no doubt about that. And so when I read, a commentary from, say, Keicher, who I respect greatly, and I think that I would consider him an acquaintance. I do disagree with him, though, on things. So when I read Keicher, I have to understand that Keicher's coming from a very specific point of view. And so that needs to be understood and needs to be put up against other people who are writing on the same topics. Okay. Are we good on that?
Yeah. Just to recap, there's nothing wrong if you want to read. A lot of it you can find online, even in English translation. If you want to just get an understanding of what the Mishnah is, just Google, Mishnah and find some English translation and just read a little bit. Even if the translation isn't great, you'll get a sense of what's going on. Same thing with the midrash. But what you have to understand is put it in its proper historical context.
Right.
And it is not capital N, capital O, capital T, an appropriate or even helpful or edifying lens for framing our reading of the scriptures. We have to understand. Now, the rabbis would have you believe that. The rabbis, meaning the strict rabbis who believe that the Mishnah is oral Torah from Moses, unbroken, they are going, in fact, ideologically are committed to that proposition, that you can't understand the written Torah if you do not have the rabbinic authority guiding your reading.
Right. Propaganda, once again.
That's the propaganda
element.
That's the problem that the Jewish believers who are of the rabbinic worldview, that's a problem they have. That's a problem. That's if they have to sort that out for themselves, of whether or not they want to keep ordaining rabbis or not, or whether they, but it doesn't, but them telling those believers, telling Gentiles that that the whole Torah is not for them, we don't have to listen to them on that. Right. Because we are, like Paul says in Galatians, if you belong to Messiah, you are Abraham's seed, you're heirs according to the promise. This is the blessing of Abraham is for you. You are grafted in. This is your inheritance. We do not have to explain ourselves to Messianic Jews who are drunk with rabbinic Wonderland chocolate milk.
Preach. Yes.
But it doesn't. But I don't mean to be dismissive of their problem. They have a unique historical predicament, and I've known and talked to Jews who were rabbinic Jews. They came to faith and they got booted out of their communities. They got horribly treated, families broken up, and were legitimately ordained rabbis in that world. And they don't go around calling themselves rabbis anymore, because they clung to the faith of Yeshua and they love him, and they don't care, even though horrible things happened to them. They counted it as good for Messiah. But then you have people who are born Jewish, particularly it seems like in America, and they have identity issues and they're not sure who they are. And so they find a path of secure identity imagined in converting back to Judaism and then trying to teach the church what the true Jewish Messiah is. And don't follow them. I'm just telling you, don't follow those people. They're leading people down to a dead end, because their real problem is something different than what they're focused on. Their real problem is their own
identity, their
own comfort with just being in Messiah. And they don't have to be accepted by the rabbis, Right. But once you have the Messianic Jewish institutions that start ordaining rabbis, it's a confused space. That's all I'm going to say. But it's not my problem to solve. I will never because forget. I'm not Jewish. It's not my problem. Sorry, it's not my problem. I have the scriptures, and that's.
Let's end on two stories instead of going to another topic. Let's end on two stories. Number one, I will never forget the time that I was talking to, and I won't mention any names, but I was talking to someone who is high up at the MJAA. We were talking about a position paper that the IAMCS had written on my father, where they accuse him of. And it was a total hit piece. Talk about propaganda. It was a hit piece to try to move people away from the teaching of my father. But it was a hit piece saying that he was teaching salvation by works, which my father not only wrote a response to, but vigorously denies and showed throughout his work that was not the case. And they said that because my father has preached that Gentiles should keep the Torah. Anyway, so we're talking, and I bring up to this person, well, you said that that my father taught a different gospel than Paul, and then I took him to Galatians, where it says anyone who teaches a different gospel than us is accursed. And I said, so it seems as though you're saying that my father is accursed because he's preaching a different gospel. And he, well, okay, yeah, I see why you would say that, kind of thing. And then he said something about, well, it's always suspicious to us when Gentiles try to teach Jews about the Torah, or something to that effect. And I said, my father's Jewish. And he said, wait, what? I said, yeah, my father's Jewish. He said, really? I said, yeah, his mother's maiden name was Schwartz. My father's, very Jewish. And he said, you guys should be members of the MJAA.
He tries to sell you.
Yeah, all of a sudden, why don't you guys come to the next meeting? It was like, as soon as he found out that my dad was actually Jewish by blood, it was like, oh, you're part of it. Come on in. When he thought my father was a Gentile, it was, oh, he's a curse because he's preaching a different gospel. But if he's Jewish and preaching a different gospel,
there's definitely an identity insecurity, or I don't know what. I'm not a psychologist.
Okay, second story. So, several years ago, we are in Denver, and we're staying at a hotel, and we get into the elevator to go down to the lobby, and Rob is standing next to me, and it stops a floor down, and a guy gets on. He's got a hat on, much like Rob is wearing a hat today, and he's got kind of his coat up around him, and he comes in, and he stands kind of off over here. And Rob, I've never seen anything quite like this come out of Rob. Rob goes, oh, my word. Oh, I'm so sorry to ask this, but would you mind if I got a picture with you? Now, I'm thinking this guy must be a scholar he must be the greatest New Testament scholar of all time. Or maybe he is the greatest Hebrew scholar of all time. Maybe it's Neusner, but it's not, because he's not old enough, right? Like, I don't know who this guy is, but I don't recognize him. And the guy kind of sheepishly, mind you, sheepishly says, yes, of course. And so Rob hands me his phone. Can you please take a picture of me with this person? Now, I still to this day I did some research after Rob told me who it was, and it was
Steve Vai.
Steve Vai. If you don't know,
when I was learning guitar as a I think I first heard him when I was 15 years old. He really
was the first time you heard. Wait, was the first time you heard Steve Vai when Ralph Macchio beat him?
No, but that was the same. It was the same era.
So for those who don't know, go look up Ralph Macchio.
Yeah, you can watch the clip. Yeah.
Crossroads guitar battle, and Steve Vai,
the Karate Kid guy. Yeah.
Ralph Macchio beats Steve Vai at the guitar. But anyway, it was the biggest show of fangirl that I have ever seen take place.
I own that. That was me.
Do you still have that picture? You still got
somewhere,
that picture?
Yeah, on my phone, I think. Yeah, you texted it to me.
Yeah. That was
but
awesome.
Here's the cool thing: is that like had that happened when I was a teenager, I'd be like, "How do you play that fast lick on that guitar solo?" But here we talked for almost a half an hour on the street of Denver, I was talking to him about Jewish scribal tradition, the Dead Sea Scrolls, Jewish sectarianism. He was asking like all sorts of questions about that. And he said, hey, what you're doing is really important. I'm like, okay, cool. Anyway.
And then he got his phone number. Now they talk every day.
No.
Oh, you should have gotten his email address. Hey, I can send you some manuscript clippings. No. All right, guys. Hey, listen, we do need things to talk about next week. So send them to us, and it'll hopefully, we'll see. We're hoping that next week will be our season 10 kickoff. If not, it'll be the next week. Kind of depends on a couple of different factors, but we do need content for that show, and it needs to be great. It needs to be dynamite content, perhaps the best content we've ever had. So if you've been saving it in the vault, now's the time. 253-465-3205. That's our answering machine. You can tell us all about your idea. Excuse me, I got something in my lungs. chegg@torahresource.com. Write us an email. Tell us all about what you want us to talk about. That would be good. And also, don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel so that when we do go live or when we do upload videos from the season 10 opener, you won't miss it. And we desperately need some great content. So please. All right. Hey, thanks for doing a show with me, Rob. Good show.
Hey, thank you, man. Good show. Thank you, everybody, for being part of it.
That's right. All right, here we go. We hope that this conversation has done at least one thing. That is to glorify our great God and Savior, Yeshua the Messiah. You know why? Well, you know why, because Messiah matters.
Yo.